I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are stepping into a genuinely fascinating, almost hidden wing of history. We're looking at the ancient religious texts that, well, just didn't make the cut. These are the books that early religious authorities decided were way too radical, too bizarre, or simply too heretical to be included in the canonical Bible. Today, we're relying entirely on the historical source material to uncover what was actually written in these lost pages, and we're going to unpack it right here to really understand the profound impact they could have had.
Okay, let's dive into this by laying down a really solid foundation. You're going to hear two critical terms quite a bit today. First up is apocrypha, which literally translates to hidden or uncanonical texts. Basically, these are writings that claimed profound religious authority but were ultimately rejected by mainstream traditions. The second term is Gnosticism. This was an ancient belief system that placed massive emphasis on secret, mystical spiritual knowledge over your standard orthodox teachings. In the Gnostic view, knowing the secret was the absolute, literal key to salvation.
Which leads us to the ultimate question we're answering today: what exactly was so dangerous about these ancient books? Why did early religious leaders feel an absolute necessity to ban, burn, or bury these specific writings? Like, what kind of ideas were so threatening that they had to be completely scrubbed from canonical history?
Section 1. Cosmic Battles and Demons.
Here we're looking at ancient texts that take familiar historical or biblical names and just thrust them into this wild world of magic, sorcery, and warfare. First up is the Book of Enoch. This is an ancient Jewish apocalyptic text attributed to Noah's great-grandfather. Now, while it was highly significant in the Second Temple period, and fun fact, is even referenced in the New Testament, it was ultimately rejected by most traditions. And when you look at the narrative, it becomes incredibly clear why. The text reveals this epic cosmic battle. Angels, known as the Watchers, actually descend to Earth, seduce human women, and father these giant, violent beings called the Nephilim. Worse, these fallen angels teach humanity forbidden knowledge, like how to make weapons and how to perform sorcery. It's this epic tale of corruption that triggers the flood, with Enoch serving as the prophet to warn these fallen angels of their doom.
Then we have the Testament of Solomon. We usually associate King Solomon with profound wisdom, right? The biblical books of Psalms and Ecclesiastes. But this text, written much later between the 1st and 5th centuries AD, pivots his story entirely into demonology. According to this text, Solomon receives a magical ring directly from the archangel Michael. And what does he do with it? Well, he compels demons like Beelzebul to reveal their dark secrets, and wildly, he forces them to literally build the temple in Jerusalem using supernatural power.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the Testament of Solomon categorizes these entities. The text lists 36 specific demons, but it intricately links each one to signs of the zodiac and attributes specific human diseases to them. This reveals a massive Egyptian astrological influence layered right over traditional Palestinian theology. So it wasn't just a story, it was an ancient, magical, medical manual. It was never canonized because it lacked apostolic origin, but it heavily influenced Western magical practices for centuries.
Section 2. A very different Jesus. If you thought demons building the temple was strange, just wait until we look at the childhood of Jesus. We're looking at the infancy Gospel of Thomas, dating from the late 2nd century. This text covers the missing childhood years of Jesus, from ages 5 to 12. The canonical view of Jesus during his youth is simply that he grew in wisdom and obedience. But the apocryphal Thomas presents a deeply chaotic child. This 5-year-old Jesus animates clay birds, which is actually a miracle also noted in the Quran, but he also uses his powers destructively. When provoked, he curses other children, leading to their deaths, and he even blinds people who complain to his earthly father, Joseph. Over the course of the text, he eventually learns to use his powers for good, reversing these acts by resurrecting the dead and healing the blind. But this erratic, honestly sometimes terrifying behavior is exactly why early writers like Irenaeus dismissed it entirely as heretical.
Section 3. Heaven, Hell, and Forgeries.
Here we'll examine a text that practically invented the graphic depiction of the afterlife. The Apocalypse of Peter is a 2nd century Christian text that gives us one of the earliest, most detailed accounts of heaven and hell. Overseen by Ezrael, the angel of wrath, the punishments for the damned are brutally specific to their earthly crimes. Blasphemers are hung by their tongues. Liars have their lips cut off. The wealthy who ignored the poor are pierced by stones, and adulterers are hung over roaring fires. The narrative notes that the damned actually beg for mercy, but an angel tells them it is far too late for repentance. These incredibly graphic, horrific descriptions were the primary reason this text was banned from standard public reading.
But, it wasn't all torment. The text also contrasts this dark imagery with a highly specific, wondrous vision of paradise. Heaven, in the Apocalypse of Peter, is described as a brilliant realm of everlasting flowers and rich spices. Intriguingly, it gives the righteous a very specific physical makeover. They're described as having milky white skin, curly hair, and wearing luminous clothing, beautifully resembling the angels themselves.
Now, not all hidden texts are ancient mysteries. Some are outright medieval hoaxes. Take the Gospel of Barnabas. It claims to be an eyewitness account from the 1st century, yet there is a total, deafening absence of this text from the historical record for over 1,000 years. It just suddenly appears out of nowhere between the 13th and 15th centuries. Scholars overwhelmingly agree this is a forgery, blending canonical elements with Islamic themes, despite actually contradicting both the Bible and the Quran in major ways. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer audacity of this forgery. It reimagines the most central event in Christian history. While the canonical Gospels describe Jesus being crucified, the Gospel of Barnabas claims that Judas Iscariot was actually transformed to look like Jesus and took his place on the cross, while the real Jesus was rescued and taken directly to heaven. No way, right? It's a complete rewrite.
Section 4. Reimagining the disciples. This idea of character swapping leads us perfectly into how several hidden texts completely inverted the reputations of Jesus' closest followers. In standard doctrine, Judas Iscariot is the ultimate traitor, the greedy betrayer. But the Gospel of Judas, a Gnostic text from the 2nd century, flips this entirely. In this manuscript, Judas isn't a villain, he is the enlightened hero. The text claims he was the only disciple who truly grasped Jesus' spiritual mission, seeing through the physical world to the spiritual reality. In this version, Jesus actually asks Judas to betray his physical body so his divine spirit can be released. The other disciples are depicted as ignorant, stuck in physical rituals like animal sacrifice, which this text deeply condemns.
We see a similar reimagining in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Discovered in the late 19th century, this text presents Mary not as a repentant sinner, but as a premier spiritual leader and confidant of Jesus. The text posits a profound idea that the material world is essentially an illusion, trapping souls, and salvation comes exclusively through inner knowledge. What's absolutely fascinating is the internal politics depicted here. The Apostle Peter heavily doubts Mary's teachings, reflecting the patriarchal views of the early church. But another disciple, Levi, fiercely defends her, firmly establishing a Gnostic acknowledgement of female spiritual authority.
Section 5. The Gnostic False Gods.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because if you want to know why Gnostic texts were banished, it's because they completely inverted the nature of God and reality itself. According to a really dense 2nd century text called the Apocrypha of John, it starts with the monad, the ultimate indescribable supreme divine principle. The monad creates a divine entity named Barbello, and together they generate spiritual realms and beings called aeons. But one aeon, named Sophia, acts independently and accidentally gives birth to a malevolent, ignorant entity named Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth doesn't know the higher spiritual realms exist, so thinking he is the only God, he creates our dark, dim, physical universe and traps spiritual essence inside human bodies just to keep that divine light imprisoned. It's like a giant cosmic trap.
We see this exact same theme in the Apocalypse of Adam, and it completely transforms a story we all know. In canonical texts, the Garden of Eden is a beautiful paradise created by a loving God for humanity. But in the Gnostic view, the creator of the physical world, often called Yaldabaoth or Sakla, is a malevolent warden. Eden is not a paradise, it's a prison. It was designed to keep Adam and Eve distracted by base, earthly desires, so they forget they are actually eternal angels trapped in flesh.
So the crucial point is this total theological reversal. Gnostic texts argue that the God of the Old Testament, who created the physical world, is actually the bad guy. Therefore, the tree of knowledge wasn't a test of obedience, it was literally the only way to gain spiritual enlightenment and realize you were in a prison. And the serpent? Reinterpreted entirely as a spiritual guide trying to wake humanity up to the higher truth. Christ's role in these texts isn't to die for sins, but to come into this physical prison and bring the secret knowledge required to wake up our true divine spirits.
Which leaves us looking at an entirely different landscape of history and spirituality. From magic rings and chaotic child miracles to cosmic traps and reimagined betrayers, these apocryphal texts pushed the boundaries of ancient thought to their absolute limits. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If these texts had somehow survived the bans, the burnings, and the editing of early religious authorities, if they sat side by side with the canonical texts we know today, how much of our modern historical, cultural, and spiritual understanding would be fundamentally different right now. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history that's been handed to you.